when he said, "Be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you." Reasons for the hope that is in us, reasons for our belief. In making our case for the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, I believe God intends us to find and use the evidence he has given, reasons, if you will, which affirm the truthfulness of his work.
And for a critic to say that all evidence shows that the Book of Mormon is clearly non-historical, that it was just a 19th century invention by Joseph Smith, then I expect for there to be good, compelling, debunking answers to these 10 evidences.
Mormonism with the Murph, where Larry Singh explores church history and the church's truth claims.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So in this episode, I'm going to be looking at what are, in my view, the top 10 evidences for the authenticity, the divine origin, and the historicity of the Book of Mormon. So I have done a very long series into the Book of Mormon, and I was looking at a lot of the main criticisms or arguments going against the Book of Mormon, some of the naturalistic theories. I also was looking at apologetic responses to the criticisms and some of the strongest evidence in favor. I've also had the opportunity to interview a wide variety and range of scholars and apologists on the topic, as well as critics. I've spoken to people like Brian Hales, talking about the complexity of the Book of Mormon and if Joseph Smith had the skills to produce the Book of Mormon. I spoke to Brant Gardner. We had multiple episodes on Book of Mormon historicity, Mesoamerican geography, and his view of translation. I talked to Blake Ostler about his view of the translation of the Book of Mormon and responding to some of the criticisms or 19th century influences, as well as people like Stephen Smoot, talking about evidence in favor for the Book of Mormon and responding to some of the critical arguments or naturalistic explanations, as well as Neil Rapley and Dan Peterson on evidence for the Book of Mormon, Hugo Perego looking at DNA. And I've also spoken to Dan Vogel about his naturalistic theory or explanation for the Book of Mormon, as well as Anthony Miller and some of their responses to apologetic arguments. And I did a final episode on the Book of Mormon where I really tried to take all the critical arguments going against the Book of Mormon, all the evidence in favor, and then for me to try to come to some sort of consensus, some sort of resolution. What is my conclusion on the Book of Mormon? Somebody once asked me, what do I see as the top 10 evidences for the Book of Mormon? And this video will be, for me, just outlining what I think are the 10 best arguments in favor for Book of Mormon historicity. Now, I want to be clear that I'm not saying that these 10 things prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the Book of Mormon is true, divine, ancient, or historical. And I'm also not saying that there's no good criticisms or arguments going against Book of Mormon historicity. I've talked about these in some of my episodes, things maybe to do with biblical scholarship or anachronisms or King James Bible material. However, if I were to go with the critics and their arguments and go with a naturalistic explanation for the Book of Mormon, I do not know how to account for these 10 things. And just as I believe that we as believers or apologists can't hide away or ignore some of the critical arguments being made against the Book of Mormon or other things to do with Joseph Smith or church history. Likewise for critics, I think they really have to deal and account for the evidence in favor. And I believe the best theory, the best view is the one that tries to account for all of the data and all of the evidence and not just focus on the side that supports one's view. Now, I know some believers might feel that shouldn't your spiritual witness and your testimony from the Holy Ghost be the foundation for your testimony? That should be the primary reason why you believe in the Book of Mormon's divinity. So why even look for secular evidence to try to prove? I really like a couple of quotes from Elder Neil A. Maxwell on this, and also what Elder Holland had to say in a conference that he gave at a 50-year celebration of the discovery of Chiasmus. He says, all the scriptures, including the Book of Mormon, will remain in the realm of faith. Science will not be able to prove or disprove Holy Writ. However, enough plausible evidence will come forth to prevent scoffers from having a field day, but not enough to remove the requirement of faith. Believers must be patient during such unfolding. And while I believe that the ultimate foundation and most important element for believing in the Book of Mormon is ultimately a spiritual witness and spiritual experiences coming from the Spirit and God manifesting and revealing to you its truth and divinity, I think it's also important to take into account the secondary evidences in favor, which can strengthen one's faith or might cause somebody who dismisses the Book of Mormon to reconsider it and then go back to God seeking a spiritual answer. The scriptures talk about revelation being both coming into your heart and into your mind, being in both a spiritual but also in an intellectual way. The Doctrine and Covenants says in section 88 that as all have not faith, to seek you out from the best books, words of knowledge, seek learning by study and also by faith. I feel like the Lord wants us to capitalize and to seek out the best resources, the best scholarship, and the best evidence that there is in favor, for that to go hand in hand, accompanied with our spiritual convictions and spiritual experiences, and doesn't have to take away from one's spiritual testimony that they have of the book, but enhance it. Now, if some might feel that searching for evidence in favor doesn't that take away from your testimony that you receive from the Holy Ghost, I think Elder Holland provides a good answer in his conference talk where he says this.
Now, faith and testimony, gospel devotion and church loyalty, conviction so strong it leads to covenants and consecration, are ultimately matters of the Spirit. They come as a gift from God, delivered and confirmed to our soul by the Holy Ghost in his divine role as revelator, witness, teacher of truth. But it should be noted that truly rock-ribbed faith and uncompromised conviction comes with its most complete power when it engages our head as well as our heart. Behold, the Lord requireth the heart and a willing mind, Jehovah declared to the early saints. And to Oliver Cowdery specifically, he said, I will tell you in your mind and in your heart by the Holy Ghost. Behold, this is the spirit of revelation, close quote. That the receipt of any truth is ultimately a spiritual experience, an enlightenment facilitated and confirmed by the Holy Ghost. Secondly, that definition makes it clear that truth born by the Holy Spirit comes with, in effect, two manifestations, two witnesses, if you will, the force of fact as well as the force of feeling. Peter assumed that twofold aspect of our conviction when he said, be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you. Reasons for the hope that is in us, reasons for our belief, to understand in a court of law the power and primacy of evidence. In making our case for the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, I believe God intends us to find and use the evidence he has given, reasons, if you will, which affirm the truthfulness of his work.
If one is troubled or overcome by doubts or criticisms going against the Book of Mormon historicity, I think this is when also looking at evidence in favor and a case and reasons to believe becomes really important. I've done episodes and covered many of these things in my series, in my own episodes, in my interviews with scholars, but this episode will really be me trying to accumulate it all into one long video. And I'm going to be borrowing a lot of the short videos, things which have been done from Book of Mormon Central. I'll also be borrowing from LDS Truth Claims and some wee snippets from my own videos as well. And you'll read documents like the CS letter or Mormon Think or LDS discussions. Well, they will present an argument or evidence going against, and then they will ask a question. And after each evidence, I'm going to ask questions that I would like people who are unbelievers or critics to think and try to answer. So let's jump in to the top 10 evidences. Number 1 is the miracle of the translation of the Book of Mormon.
The popular TV show South Park has an episode titled All About Mormons, in which Joseph Smith's account of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon is mocked as absurd and completely unbelievable. For many people, Joseph Smith's claims are just too ridiculous, and the South Park episode effectively captures this incredulous attitude. But what is the actual history of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon? And is there evidence that supports Joseph Smith's claim that the book is an authentic translation? As Joseph Smith explained, in September 1823, an angel named Moroni appeared to him and told him about an ancient record written on plates of gold and buried in a hill near the Smith family farm in Manchester, New York. Joseph said that the next day, Moroni led him to the hill and showed him the gold plates, along with translation instruments he described as being 2 stones and silver bows. But Joseph wasn't permitted to take the plates or the translation instruments for another 4 years. And so, in the spring and summer of 1828, Joseph, with Martin Harris and his wife Emma working as his scribes, began the translation of the Book of Mormon. Those involved with the translation of the Book of Mormon said that Joseph initially used the stones found with the plates. Those stones were later described as spectacles, or the Urim and Thummim, and in the Book of Mormon they are simply called interpreters. At some point, however, Joseph began translating with another seer stone he had used in money digging and folk magic practices during his youth. Be sure to check out the link to the church's Gospel Topics essay that explains Joseph's use of the seer stones if you're interested or unfamiliar with this topic. Although it's not always clear which translation instrument he was using and when, the eyewitnesses described how Joseph would place the seer stone in a hat and press his face into the brim of the hat to shield out external light. He would then read off words to his scribe as they appeared in the stone. Although this sounds odd, it does strengthen the claim that Joseph did not personally write the Book of Mormon, as he could not use reference materials of any kind in such a position. It's crucial to understand that the eyewitnesses involved in the production of the Book of Mormon all firmly maintained that Joseph was not reading from any book or manuscript, but instead dictated the text to his scribe as it was revealed to him in the translation instruments. The translation was then completed in June 1829, a copyright for the Book of Mormon having been secured on June 11th. What's so remarkable about this part of the translation of the Book of Mormon is the breakneck pace of the work. The translation of the text during this time was completed in an astounding 65 to 72 working days. Based on the number of pages in the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon, that puts the rate of the translation of the Book of Mormon at 7 or 8 pages a day. In addition to eyewitness testimony that Joseph and Oliver did not stop to make revisions, the evidence seen in their surviving original manuscript of the Book of Mormon confirms the rapid speed in which the book was translated. The original manuscript shows smooth flowing text and the kinds of mistakes a scribe makes when hearing a rapid dictation. In July and August of 1829, Joseph Smith approached a number of local printers to contract the publication and sale of the Book of Mormon. Besides printers in nearby Rochester, New York, Joseph also approached the Palmyra publishers Egbert B. Grandin and Jonathan Hadley. On August 11, 1829, Hadley published a short description of his encounter with Joseph Smith in his newspaper, the Palmyra Freeman. Quoting either Joseph himself or someone else associated with the translation, Hadley wrote, "It was said that the leaves of the Book of Mormon were plates of gold, about 8 inches long, 6 wide, and 1/8 of an inch thick, on which were engraved characters or hieroglyphics. By placing the spectacles in a hat and looking into it, Smith could, he said so at least, interpret these characters." In that same account, Hadley sneered that Joseph Smith was very illiterate and his claims fraudulent. However, even if he personally disbelieved Joseph's description of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, Hadley provided a contemporary non-Mormon account of the translation of the Book of Mormon that corroborates the later Mormon accounts very nicely. Eventually, E.B. Grandin agreed to print 5,000 copies of the Book of Mormon for the price of $3,000. And on March 26, 1830, Grandin announced the publication and sale of the Book of Mormon in his newspaper, the Wayne Sentinel. From all of this, a strong case can be made for the authenticity of Joseph Smith's account of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. First, the eyewitness testimony of those directly involved with the translation unanimously agree that Joseph was not copying from another book or manuscript, but rather that he dictated the text of the Book of Mormon as he peered into the seer stone. Second, the astonishingly rapid pace of the dictation of the text from April to June 1829 can only be described as miraculous, given the Book of Mormon's intricate narrative, its interweaving timelines and chronologies, its profound teachings, and its subtle literary complexity. Third, the evidence uncovered in the original manuscript confirms the testimony given by eyewitnesses. It is clear from the surviving manuscript that Joseph was dictating a text at a rapid pace and did not go back to make any revisions. In addition to all of these, the historical record also indicates that Joseph and his associates were unaware of the contents of the Book of Mormon as they were translating. This makes the dictation of the text all the more remarkable, as it is next to impossible to imagine that Joseph just made up a text as intricate as the Book of Mormon on the fly. Any naturalistic theories explaining the translation would be more plausible if they could argue from the premise that Joseph took a lot of time, had a lot of privacy, was working in the luxury of a setting with diverse resources, and had the freedom to make as many revisions as needed. However, none of this bears out once you look at the actual documented history. Thanks to the painstaking efforts of historians and other scholars, it is safe to say that Joseph Smith's claims are more lucid, straightforward, and based on the best evidence than a silly cartoon would have you believe. The burden of proof to articulate a coherent counter-explanation based on just as compelling historical evidence now rests on skeptics who simply dismiss Joseph Smith's claims out of hand. Taken together, this evidence indicates, as Joseph testified throughout his life, that the Book of Mormon came forth and was translated by the gift and power of God.
Number 2 is the complexity of the Book of Mormon.
Many early critics of the Book of Mormon believed it lacked any literary merit whatsoever. For instance, one man claimed that Joseph Smith was a blockhead, and that the Book of Mormon was the most gross, the most ridiculous, the most imbecile, the most contemptible concern to be palmed off upon a society as a revelation. Yet over time, even some of the Book of Mormon's most skeptical critics have felt compelled to change their tune. For instance, Joseph's famous biographer Fawn Brodie saw him as a myth-maker of prodigious talent, and Harold Bloom, a Yale-trained literary scholar, considered Joseph Smith to be a religious genius. This dramatic shift may lead some to wonder, how did Joseph the blockhead suddenly transform into Joseph the genius in the eyes of his critics? In truth, this change had little to do with Joseph himself, and much more to do with a 588-page book that he dictated to his scribes in less than 3 months. As people began to analyze the text more carefully, it became clear that it was far more complex and sophisticated than most had ever imagined. What makes the Book of Mormon's sophistication so remarkable is that it can be demonstrated on so many different levels. The text has over 200 named characters, over 150 named locations, multiple migrations, distinct cultures, 3 calendar systems, a system of weights and measures, complex source texts, genealogies, lineage histories, political histories, authentic legal cases, realistic battles, multiple literary genres, embedded flashbacks, brilliant doctrinal discourses, numerous fulfilled prophecies, and well over 1,000 proposed intertextual relationships and Hebrew literary elements. Amazingly, these features are all intricately woven together into a coherent narrative which is essentially free from error. For instance, the Book of Mormon has over 600 passages of geographic relevance scattered throughout its text, and yet virtually every city, land, body of water, hill, or region maintains a consistent spatial relationship with other geographic features. Another example of consistency comes from the lengthy genealogical record found in the Book of Ether. The first chapter introduces a list of 30 different kings beginning with Ether and going back to Jared. This list then serves as a framework for the rest of the book, which precisely chronicles the reigns of its kings, except in reverse order. Trying to keep track of the various sets of plates through their transmission through prophetic caretakers and how they are all tied together can be a formidable task. Yet careful analysis has shown that the source texts of the Book of Mormon have been masterfully abridged into a coherent and unified record. In the Book of Helaman, Samuel the Lamanite prophesied of the coming of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Father of heaven and of earth, the creator of all things from the beginning. This 21-word name title happens to be a verbatim quote from King Benjamin's speech, given nearly 250 pages earlier, thus offering a remarkable example of the Book of Mormon's intertextual relationships. Chapters 17 through 27 in the Book of Alma actually contain a flashback within a flashback, allowing readers to view the destruction of Ammonihah from 2 different perspectives. Yet these separate narrative threads are expertly woven together and seamlessly converge back into the original storyline. In Alma 11, we find a developed system of weights and measures. Not only does it have parallels to ancient Mesopotamian and Egyptian systems, but its units of exchange are surprisingly practical, tradition and culture. These Hebraisms are consistent with the text's claimed Israelite background, and many of them could be quite sophisticated. For instance, the entire chapter of Alma 36 is a unified chiasm, which introduces 17 key concepts and then repeats them in reverse order. Another parallel structure called gradation repeats each successive concept to create a unity of ideas and build up to a climactic conclusion. At least 50 types of poetic, grammatical, or literary Hebraisms have been identified in the Book of Mormon. Many of them show up in the dozens, and some of them, like Chiasmus, show up in the hundreds. This brief sampling can hardly convey the full depth and breadth of the Book of Mormon's impressive complexity, but it's enough to demonstrate that the book is anything but ridiculous, as many early critics believe. Some have even compared the Book of Mormon with its immersive world and characters to popular fantasy novels such as J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Yet, to put things in perspective, Tolkien was an English professor who spent decades developing and revising the world of Middle-earth and the characters who inhabited it. In contrast, Joseph Smith was an uneducated farmer who dictated the entire Book of Mormon, in the presence of multiple witnesses, in no more than 74 working days, without any notes or reference materials, without any substantive revisions, and without relying on scribes to help him remember where he had left off after interruptions. Whether a genius or not, it seems highly improbable that anyone, even a trained literary scholar like Tolkien, could have created and then flawlessly juggled so many complex features under these conditions. Yet somehow, the young 23-year-old Joseph Smith accomplished it, without any prior literary experience to speak of. As LDS scholar Daniel Peterson has noted, the intricate structure and detailed complexity of the Book of Mormon seem far better explained as the work of several ancient writers using various written sources over the space of centuries than exploding suddenly from the mind of a barely educated manual laborer on the American frontier. For this reason, the Book of Mormon's complexity, consistency, and sophistication provide excellent evidence that it truly was translated by the gift and power of God, just as Joseph Smith repeatedly testified.
I would ask, how likely is it that Joseph Smith, a 23-year-old farm boy on the American frontier with no prior authorship experience, was able to dictate a long, complex, and coherent narrative, 588 pages in under 2 months, without any notes, any manuscript, or book, including all the complex features, such as the 600 geographical references which are kept eternally consistent, the 3 calendar systems, the 3 migrations, all of the different records of record keepers, the currency system, the long complex chiasmus, the allegory of the olive tree, the later fulfilled prophecies and flashbacks, and the list of the 40 Jaredite kings spoken about in reverse order throughout the narrative. I already believe that Joseph Smith was able to do this naturally through his own creative genius. He probably would have needed some sort of eidetic memory. Doesn't this seem beyond someone's natural abilities to orally produce this? How was Joseph able to retain all of this information in his head? And Scribe said he was able to pick up from where he left off after a dictation session. How is he able to do that? If Joseph Smith was a fraud, and this is just 19th century text, why did he make it so complex and so intricate and throw in so many details that he could have easily made mistakes with? Number 3 is the witnesses of the gold plates, both the 3 witnesses, the 8 witnesses, and other informal witnesses.
Joseph Smith claimed that he translated the Book of Mormon from a set of golden plates that were given to him by an angel. After the translation was complete, Joseph said he returned the plates to the angel, making them unavailable today for examination. This account may come across as a little too convenient and lead you to wonder, is there any evidence that the plates existed at all? Introduced at the beginning of every copy of the Book of Mormon are the testimonies of the 3 and 8 witnesses. These 3 witnesses, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris, wrote that they were shown the plates by an angel, who also attested to them that Joseph Smith translated the book by the gift and power of God. It would be easy to say that these 3 men conspired with Joseph Smith, only giving their testimony of the angel and the gold plates to perpetuate a scam. But that explanation loses its strength when we consider that all 3 men eventually left the church, having at some point fallen out with Joseph Smith. Oliver Cowdery and Martin Harris later rejoined the church after Smith's death, but David Whitmer would remain estranged for the rest of his life. Despite their falling out with Smith, all 3 maintained their testimony of having seen the angel and the gold plates. In fact, David Whitmer famously went out of his way on numerous occasions to give interviews and correct newspapers he felt had misrepresented his testimony. Once he wrote, "Those who know me best know that I have always adhered to that testimony, and that no man may be misled or doubt my present views in regards to the same. I do again affirm the truth of my statements." The fact that these men never wavered in their testimony of the plates dismantles the claim of collusion. After all, they had everything to lose and nothing to gain by maintaining their testimonies after falling away from the church. And yet, each, independently of the others, insisted that their published testimony was true, whatever their disagreements with Joseph Smith may have been. With collusion being highly unlikely, others have questioned whether the 3 witnesses could have been hallucinating. Some sources quote the witnesses as saying that they saw the plates with their spiritual eyes, or with the eye of faith, which some take to mean they only imagined the plates and the angel. But that sort of language is scriptural in nature, and doesn't automatically imply hallucination. Rather, it means that the witnesses were prepared for a visionary experience in the scriptural sense. David Whitmer made this clear in an interview published in 1888. "Of course we were in the spirit when we had a view of the plates. For no man can behold the face of an angel except in a spiritual view, but we were in the body also, and everything was as natural to us as it was at any time." Whitmer insisted that he was not under any hallucination during the vision, saying, "I saw with these eyes." One might still not be convinced by the witness given by Cowdery, Harris, and Whitmer, thinking it sounds too ethereal with an angel showing them the plates. This is where the testimony of the 8 witnesses comes in, as they were given the simple, straightforward opportunity to handle the plates directly. No angel arrayed in glorious light is described by Oliver Cowdery. They simply wrote that As many of the leaves as the said Smith has translated, we did handle with our hands. And we also saw the engravings thereon, all of which has the appearance of ancient work and of curious workmanship. Once again, collusion is unlikely, given that 3 of the 8 witnesses were either excommunicated or left the church. And as with the 3 witnesses, they never recanted their testimony as published in the Book of Mormon. To explain the testimony of the 8 witnesses, some think that Joseph Smith fabricated a set of tin or lead plates that he used to trick them with. However, there is no credible historical evidence that Joseph Smith somehow faked a set of plates, let alone that he had the wherewithal to do so. Martin Harris, before he became one of the 3 witnesses, held the plates while they were in a wooden chest, and knew that they must have been either lead or gold. But Riley added that Joseph had not enough credit to buy so much lead. This theory also ignores the testimony of those who saw the angel. If we only had the testimony of the 3 witnesses, you might be able to dismiss their vision as a hallucination. And if we only had the testimony of the 8 witnesses, you might be able to say that they were being tricked by bogus plates. But combined, their testimonies support the claim that Joseph not only had plates with the appearance of gold, but also that those plates were divinely given. If the official testimonies of the 3 and 8 witnesses are not enough, there are also the testimonies left by other secondary witnesses who encountered the plates. For example, Josiah Stoll testified in 1830 that he was one of the first to handle the plates under a linen cloth when Joseph returned from finally obtaining them in 1827. Another witness was Mary Whitmer. According to sources close to her, Mary was shown the plates by the angel Moroni as she was milking cows. This happened completely independent of Joseph Smith or the others involved in the translation of the plates. Other women, including Lucy Mack and Emma Smith, handled the plates and other artifacts Joseph brought home. Emma, for example, at one time related, "I once felt of the plates as they thus lay on the table, tracing their outline and shape. They seemed to be pliable like thick paper, and would rustle with a metallic sound when the edges were moved by the thumb, as one does sometimes thumbing through the edges of a book." The combined weight of these secondary witnesses further complicates the arguments that the plates were either imagined or fabricated, since these witnesses include those who, independent of Joseph Smith, reported encounters with the plates and the angel. Thanks to all of these different accounts, we have a pretty good idea of what the plates were like. The eyewitnesses described the plates as being gold or having the appearance of gold, but it's important to keep in mind that the plates most likely were not pure 24-karat gold. Not only would the plates have been too heavy if they were, but they also would have been too soft to write on. The witnesses reported that the plates weighed approximately between 40 to 60 pounds. Josiah Stoll also added the intriguing detail that he noticed a slight green hue on the corner of the plates. This reinforces the argument that the plates were likely composed of a Mesoamerican copper and gold alloy called tumbaga, which would account for the weight and the green hue, which was likely the result of the oxidation of the copper. We also know that the dimensions of the plates were about 6 or 7 inches by 8 inches, and were about as thick as common tin or pliable paper, according to the witnesses. On both sides of the leaves of the book were written engravings or characters, and 3 D-shaped rings held the plates together, with a large portion of them being sealed physically in some manner. The reported composition and dimensions of the plates by the witnesses are all consistent with each other, and were given at different times and on different occasions, with just slight variation. This is further evidence against claims of collusion among the witnesses and reinforces their credibility. From a historical perspective, it is difficult to disavow the reality of the gold plates. There is simply too much compelling documented evidence attesting to their existence. It's safe to say that between the years 1827 to 1830, Joseph Smith had in his possession a set of plates that were seen, hefted, felt, and examined by a number of witnesses. People today are free to disbelieve the witnesses if they like, but they cannot accuse them of fraud or insincerity based on any credible historical evidence. This is why the respected historian of early Mormonism, Richard Bushman, once remarked, "Most of the detailed sources about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon were written by believers, and to follow them too closely infuses a narrative with their faith. Secular historians are, therefore, more inclined than Mormons to suppress source material from Joseph's closest associates." Or in other words, people are free to disbelieve these witnesses, but they must still acknowledge the picture that we see from the historical evidence. There is nothing in these sources that compel an alternative view. So even if we don't have the plates available today, there is evidence attesting that Joseph Smith did in fact have them, and that he got them from an angel, just as he claimed.
And on the screen here, we have lots of quotes coming from the 3 witnesses, David Whitmer, Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, where over and over again they reaffirm their testimony. They know they saw the angel in the plates, and the 8 witnesses as well, talk about seeing and handling the plate not covered in a cloth. And not only this, but the Book of Mormon prophesies that the 3 and the 8 witnesses would see the plates, which is a pretty amazing thing for Joseph Smith to prophesy if he is the author, and then for it to come to pass. How does one account for the testimony of the 3 witnesses who all claim that they saw the angel in the plates? All 3 of them needing to have some sort of a mass hallucination, hallucinating the same angel and the plates, and all 3 never denying their testimony and reaffirming it over and over and over until their death. Many of the witnesses leave the church and some come back, but none deny their testimonies. The 8 witnesses reaffirm that they saw and handled the plates. None of them deny their testimonies. How likely is it that Joseph Smith was able to manufacture and create his own set of tin plates to trick the witnesses with them and then induce mass hallucinatory experiences in the 3 witnesses? Is this really more likely than them telling the truth about their experience? Where are all those people accusing Joseph Smith of making tin plates? How does one account for all of the witnesses as well, the informal witnesses who support there being a plate artifact, and Mary Whitmer's experience of being shown the angel in the plates, with Joseph not even being present? Why do critics only focus on a few second or third hand statements and omit the vast majority of the first hand statements from the 3 and the 8 witnesses, where over and over again they say they know they saw the angel and they saw the plates, and the 8 witnesses that they saw and handled the plates? What are the odds of Joseph Smith prophesying in the Book of Mormon, in the Book of Ether, and 2 Nephi 27, that the 3 witnesses would see the plates by the power of God, and then pulling off this mass hallucination experience? Doesn't this seem almost as miraculous as an angel coming and there really was ancient, authentic gold plates? Number 4 is Lehi of Jerusalem and 1 Nephi, fitting very well with the cultural and religious context of Jerusalem in 600 BCE.
Okay, the beginning of the Book of Mormon is consistent with the culture and situation in Jerusalem in about 600 BC. We talked about how it fits the context in at least the following: the migration of the northern kingdom of Lehi's ancestors and his land of inheritance, which is separate from their home in Jerusalem. Egyptian influence in writing during the time of peak Egyptian influence in Jerusalem. Lehi is one of the many documented prophets sent to Jerusalem, and belief that Jerusalem could be destroyed. Lehi preaching against some of Josiah's reforms. Lehi preaching against the removal of original temple tradition, teaching atonement, the atoning Messiah. Nephi understanding the tree as woman due to Asherah worship. Related to that, to the tree of life as ancient wisdom symbolism intact and almost certainly as it was in 600 BC, according to non-LDS scholars. Lehi's vision has an iron rod guiding people to the great tree, the older and probably original understanding of the word. Complaints of corruption, removal of scripture, plain and precious things, Melchizedek priesthood being extant in 600 BC, and Lehi is a fleeing prophet. Again, we'd argue that there's no naturalistic explanation that can reasonably account for these correspondences. How did he come up with these things by himself?
And some of the main points that Margaret Barker has made in her article and what other LDS scholars have said on this topic. So, non-LDS Old Testament scholar Margaret Barker supports that the Book of Mormon, situated in Jerusalem 600 BC, is consistent with the religious and political context in Jerusalem in 600 BC, such as the adding of scriptures before the compilation of the Pentateuch, the removal of the ancient Israelite temple tradition, the removal of Asherah worship, who is depicted as the wife of God, and sometimes depicted or symbolized as the tree of life, and of an atoning Messiah, Yahweh, the Son of the God Most High. Lehi and Nephi have visions, and they don't believe that worship can only occur in Jerusalem, and they preach of an atoning Messiah. Nephi sees the tree of life, that it represents God's love. He sees Mary and her son Jesus, connecting with the symbolism of Asherah as a tree and a mother figure. The narrative of Zosimus bears some strong similarities to Lehi's departure. She says that there's some evidence up until prior to Josiah's reforms of a Melchizedek priesthood, part of the Abrahamic religion, and the temple tradition of Yahweh, Son of the God Most High, correlating with our current LDS theology and doctrine being restored. If I'm being honest, I actually don't understand why, if Margaret Barker, with his scholarship and her interpretations and all of the things that she sees consistent with the revelations of Joseph Smith, and particularly the first book of Nephi in the Book of Mormon, why she's maybe not considered joining, or if she just sees this all as Joseph just being a religious genius. I think that this kind of is good support for the Book of Mormon as evidence in favor, or at least that it fits quite plausibly in the context in Jerusalem in 600 BC, the things happening with Josiah's reforms, the removal of Asherah and this temple tradition, the de-emphasis of an atoning Messiah, even the existence of Melchizedek priesthood, and the editing of the scriptures occurring by the Deuteronomist scribes, who are very much trying to centralize the religion and emphasize Moses, the Aaronic priesthood, and Deuteronomist law. The next one is Old World Geography and the convergences between Lehi's travel through the Arabian desert with Arabian geography and the strong convergence between Nahom and Bountiful.
The Book of Mormon's opening scenes provide an excellent opportunity to test some of its geographic details. The story begins with Lehi's family fleeing from Jerusalem, which is in the same location today as it was in Lehi's day. The family then traveled south until they reached the borders of the Red Sea, another enduring landmark. Starting with these two known locations, researchers have been able to compare the rest of Nephi's travel account with the geography of the Arabian Peninsula. The results have been both fascinating and faith-promoting. One of the first clues that Nephi's account is authentic is his frequent use of the expression, "Land of Jerusalem." The phrase never occurs in the Bible, and Joseph Smith was criticized for its use in the Book of Mormon, yet it shows up in the Amarna letters and Dead Sea Scrolls, proving that it was used anciently. In addition, archaeology reveals that in Lehi's time, a thriving hinterland surrounded the city of Jerusalem. Since these conditions were unique to the 7th century BC, the expression "Land of Jerusalem" adds to the story's ring of authenticity. It's also notable that Nephi consistently described journeys away from Jerusalem and into the wilderness as going down, and journeys toward Jerusalem as going up. This agrees with ancient idiom and accurately reflects the region's topography, where Jerusalem sits much higher than the surrounding wilderness regions. In 1829, Joseph Smith didn't even know Jerusalem was a walled city, so there's a good chance he wasn't aware of its raised elevation either. After leaving Jerusalem and reaching the borders of the Red Sea, Nephi's family traveled for 3 more days until they camped by a notable source of water. Lehi described it as a continually running river which flowed through a firm, steadfast, and immovable valley before emptying out toward the Red Sea. It had grain, fruit, and seeds of every kind. A valley known as Wadi Tayyib al-Ism nicely fits each of these criteria. It lies within a 3-day journey from where Lehi and his family most likely arrived at the Red Sea, and it has fruits, grains, and a stream that cuts through sheer granite cliffs. It's exactly the type of scene that would impress wandering, thirsty travelers. What makes this location so appealing, though, is that it contains the only known stream in all of northwest Arabia that continually flows toward the Red Sea throughout the year. This, of course, fits Lehi's description of a continually running river. Maps in Joseph Smith's day didn't mention this stream, and it wasn't even reported in a comprehensive geological survey published in 1984, so it's highly unlikely that Joseph Smith knew anything about it in 1829. After leaving the Valley of Lemuel, Lehi's group traveled for 4 days in a nearly south-southeast direction until they reached a place they called Shazer, where they stopped for a time to hunt. Again, a plausible site can be found right where it should be. In this case, a prominent oasis with good nearby hunting grounds lies within a 4-day journey southeast of Wadi Tayyib al-Ism. Its life-preserving waters extend for 15 miles in length, making it a natural place to set up camp. After Shazer, Lehi's group took a long journey in the same southeast direction. Nephi first described their route as keeping to the most fertile parts of the wilderness and then to just the more fertile parts, suggesting that the fertility may have decreased as they traveled southward. This is also what one finds along the ancient incense trail, which several scholars think Lehi's party likely followed. Rather than being a single path, the incense trail was a network of oases that travelers took various routes to reach. Charts used by pilots show that the oases and areas of cultivated land become fewer and further between as one heads southeast along the trail, just as Nephi's statements suggest. It's in this setting of reduced fertility that Nephi tells how he broke his steel bow while hunting and how he had to make a new bow and arrow out of wood. It turns out that the wood Arabs traditionally used for making bows comes from a type of olive tree that grows in a limited range within this region. The story makes additional sense in the location because the change to a more arid climate may have been what caused Nephi's bow to break in the first place. Finally, the odd detail about Nephi making a new arrow is also quite realistic because his newly fashioned bow probably required a different length and weight of arrow than his steel bow had used. After the broken bow incident, Lehi's party traveled in the same southeast direction as before until they reached a place called Nahom, which was likely given its name by locals who already lived there. This is where Ishmael was buried and where his daughters mourned his passing. It also provides the most compelling archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon to date. In the late 90s, researchers noticed that the letters NHM were inscribed on a temple altar in Marib, Yemen, which dates to before Lehi's time. The letters refer to an ancient tribe called Nahom that still exists in the region southwest of Marib today. Like most Semitic scripts, the South Arabian script on the altars doesn't include vowels, so linguistically speaking, Nephi's Nahom could easily be a reference to the region controlled by the ancient tribe mentioned on the altars. And as you can probably guess by now, these tribal grounds are right where they should be to match up with Nephi's description of Nahom. After leaving Nahom, Lehi's party traveled nearly eastward from that time forward. This small detail is actually quite notable because the main incense trail also turned east near the Nahom tribal area. In fact, this happened to be the first location where southbound travelers could even turn east without facing a desert wasteland. Maps in Joseph Smith's day didn't mention this prominent turn, nor did they depict the impassable desert to the north. Then, just as Nephi's account predicts, a lush coastal region known today as the Thofar can be found a long journey nearly due east of the Nahom tribal grounds. A couple locations in this fertile area nicely fit Nephi's description of Bountiful. One inlet in particular, called Kor Karfot, complies with 12 specific criteria derived from Nephi's record. For instance, it features fruit and honey, trees for building ships, accessible ore for making tools, and a prominent nearby mountain where Nephi could pray. More importantly, the Thofar region is really the only place along the entire eastern coast of Arabia that even comes close to fitting Nephi's account. So, once again, the right kind of place shows up in the right spot. Altogether, these correspondences showed that Nephi's travel account is entirely plausible. While individual proposed sites are certainly intriguing, they become far more persuasive when linked together. For instance, according to Nephi's account, Nahom needs to be a long journey southeast from a place like the Valley of Lemuel, a shorter journey southeast from a place like Shazer, southeast of a region with wood that could be used to make a bow, a long journey nearly due west from a likely spot for Bountiful, and also a place where travelers can journey eastward across the peninsula without facing an impassable desert. When these types of interlocking details match up with real locations, they're difficult to explain away as mere lucky guesswork. As a way to get around this evidence, some critics have suggested that Joseph Smith obtained all this information from maps available in his day. Yet not only would any helpful map have been quite rare, but most of these geographic details in Nephi's account couldn't have been derived from even the best map or collection of maps in 1829. The bottom line is that the Book of Mormon seems to contain intimate geographic knowledge of ancient Israel and the Arabia Peninsula that few, if any, Americans in 1829 could have produced, even with the help of rare, high-quality maps. For this reason, Nephi's account of his family's travels offers excellent evidence of the Book of Mormon's historical authenticity, which in turn strengthens its witness that Jesus is the Christ.
If Joseph Smith made up the Book of Mormon and invented the story, why does it correlate so well with the cultural and religious context of Jerusalem in 600 BC? Why does evidence support the description in the Book of Mormon of the city of Jerusalem? If it's a made-up story and narrative, why does Lehi's travel from Jerusalem through the wilderness correlate and converge so well with Old World Arabian geography? What are the odds about Joseph Smith being right about the travel directions Lehi and his family traveled, matching and correlating with the incense trail, naming a place which was called Nahom where they buried Ishmael, matching an altar found at a temple near a burial site, in the location scholars believe that Nahom would be located and situated before they even found the altar, and the nearly eastward turn, finding a very strong candidate, Kor Karfot, being in the right general area and matching all the descriptions for Nephi's Bountiful. If Joseph made this up, how can we just say that this is all a coincidence? Why does it seem to correlate and converge so well with Arabian geography? Is there any evidence that Joseph Smith had knowledge of the Arabian desert? And if this was a historical travel, what evidence realistically would you require that's stronger than the convergence we see from Lehi traveling from Jerusalem to the Red Sea, traveling in a southeastward direction down the incense trail, coming to a place which was called Nahom, the altar dating to the right time, being in the right location, and an eastward turn, finding Bountiful? Well, maybe if we had the name Ishmael at Nahom, that might be better evidence, which in fact we do, and there is a name Ishmael which dates to 600 BC. The next evidence is the presence of ancient Hebrew literary elements in the Book of Mormon, including Hebraisms and Chiasmus.
Some people have disparaged the Book of Mormon for being too repetitive. For example, Edward Meyer, a prominent scholar of ancient history, found it to be clumsy, monotonous in the extreme, and repetitious. And Mark Twain once joked that if Joseph Smith had left out the phrase, "and it came to pass," then the Book of Mormon would have only been a pamphlet. These types of criticisms may cause some to wonder, does the Book of Mormon have any literary merit? Ironically, the very things that early critics found to be offensive to their modern literary tastes have, in many cases, turned out to be remarkable evidence of its Hebrew origins. The Book of Mormon indicates that the ancient prophets who wrote it tried to preserve the literary traditions and learning of their Hebrew ancestors. The early Hebrew language didn't have punctuation or paragraph breaks. Instead, Hebrew writers used various types of repetition to group, separate, compare, or contrast ideas. Scholars refer to these repetitions as parallelisms, and the Book of Mormon is chock full of them. Some structures are short and simple. For instance, synonymous parallelisms, such as this passage in Genesis, state an idea in one way and then repeat it using similar words. A similar structure is found in 2 Nephi. Other parallelisms are more elaborate. One structure, called gradation, repeats each successive idea until it builds to a climactic conclusion, as can be seen in this example from the book of Joel. Moroni chapter 8 offers a similar parallel structure, which shows how the doctrine of Christ leads step by step to eternal life. Perhaps the most impressive type of Hebrew parallelism in the Book of Mormon is Chiasmus. This structure presents a series of words or phrases in one order and then repeats and reuses them in the opposite order, as in this passage from the book of Isaiah. A similar example can be found in the book of Alma. Not all chiasms are so simple though. This chiasm in Leviticus 24 introduces 7 ideas in one order and then precisely reverses them in the opposite order. Alma 36 offers an even more elaborate example from the Book of Mormon, where 17 ideas are given in one order and then reversed. It's by no means an overstatement to say that the Book of Mormon is saturated with Hebrew parallelisms. But parallelisms aren't the only Hebrew features in the text. It contains many other grammatical and literary features that are typical of the Hebrew language. For instance, while English writers usually avoid repeating adjectives or conjunctions when making lists, Hebrew writers often included them before each item in the list. Notice how the conjunctions and, or, neither, and nor are repeated in these biblical passages. The same types of redundancies are found many places in the Book of Mormon. Another peculiar feature of the Hebrew language is its use of if-and conditionals. In English, we usually follow an if clause with the word then, or with an implied use of then. But Hebrew authors would sometimes add the conjunction and to finish the if clause. Surprisingly, the Book of Mormon has a number of if-and conditional sentences that somehow got preserved in the English translation. We know that these aren't accidental mistakes because this feature, which doesn't show up anywhere in the English language, occurs 7 times in a row in the original text of Helaman chapter 12. The Book of Mormon's frequent use of Hebrew wordplays is no less impressive, especially when considering the fact that Joseph Smith didn't study Hebrew until 5 years after the Book of Mormon's publication. One classic example deals with the name Jershon. In Hebrew, this name would mean place of inheritance, and in the Book of Mormon, that is precisely its importance. It was given to the people of Ammon as a place of inheritance when their Lamanite brethren threatened to destroy them. Dozens of other Hebrew wordplays in the Book of Mormon could be cited, and the list of categories goes on and on. Mark Twain even had a valid point about the Book of Mormon's frequent use of, and it came to pass. It does seem rather redundant in English, yet even this phrase supports the argument for Hebrew origins. It is used much more frequently in the historical narratives of the Bible, and the Book of Mormon is mostly historical narrative. In addition, the King James translators didn't like how often biblical writers used this phrase in Hebrew, and so they changed the wording about half the time when they translated the Bible into English. This means that Joseph Smith likely wouldn't have known that biblical authors used this phrase so frequently merely by reading his King James Bible. Some people have tried to underplay the significance of the Book of Mormon's Hebrew features by noting how Hebraisms, as they're often termed, can occasionally show up by random chance. In other cases, they've suggested that Joseph Smith picked up on these things simply by reading the Bible or the biblical scholarship of his day. The problem with these claims is that there are simply far too many Hebrew features in the Book of Mormon, in both type and quantity, to assume that they were created by mere chance. And although it's possible that Joseph picked up on a few of these things in his readings of the Bible, it's highly improbable that he discerned and then implemented all of them so expertly on so many occasions. As for the idea that Joseph Smith was well versed in the biblical scholarship of his day, there is simply no historical evidence that this was the case. In fact, all the evidence, from both contemporary critics and believers, indicates that the 23-year-old Joseph was not well read at the time of the translation. The bigger problem, though, is that even if he had somehow gained access to advanced biblical research, the scholars of his day were still unaware of many types of Hebrew features that can be found in the Book of Mormon. The fact is that its Hebraisms are simply too numerous and too authentically ancient to reasonably suppose that anyone in 1829 could have produced a text using them all. Their presence demonstrates that the Book of Mormon is a remarkably rich work of literature. It just follows the expectations of ancient, rather than modern literary standards. Because these Hebraisms make little sense coming from a young frontier farmer like Joseph Smith, they provide remarkable evidence that the Book of Mormon was truly written, as the text itself claims, by ancient prophets trained in the Hebrew literary traditions of their ancestors.
The next evidence in the Book of Mormon is the name Mulek being a very valid and authentic Hebrew shortened variant for the name Malkayu.
Question: did King Zedekiah really have a son named Mulek? The Book of Mormon claims that King Zedekiah had a son named Mulek, who somehow escaped execution when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem in 587 BC. Mulek then sailed to the Americas, where his descendants eventually merged with the Nephites. Yet if Zedekiah actually had a son named Mulek, you might wonder why he's never mentioned in the Bible. Or is he? Some scholars have proposed that Mulek may be a shortened form of the name Malchiah, which does show up in the Bible. This would be like the biblical name Baruch, which is short for Berechiah. It could also be compared to the English name Mike, which is short for Michael. When names were written out in ancient Hebrew, the vowels weren't included, so Mulek and Malchiah would actually look like this. And then if Malchiah's ending were dropped, which was fairly common for this type of name element, it would be spelled just like Mulek. As one scholar puts it, the MLK basis of both Hebrew names is clear. There's more to the evidence though. Not only does the name Malchiah show up in the Bible, but it does so in a way that directly invites a connection with Mulek from the Book of Mormon. In the Bible, we learn that the prophet Jeremiah was cast into the dungeon of Malchiah, the son of Hamelech. The King James translation makes it seem like Hamelech is the name of a man, but it's actually just the Hebrew term for the king, which is why many modern translations render it as Malchiah, the king's son. But who was this king? We can be confident that it was Zedekiah himself, who is mentioned in the preceding verse and is the only king named throughout this chapter. In simple English, it's as if the Bible is claiming Zedekiah had a son named Michael, and the Book of Mormon is claiming he had a son named Mike, except the actual names are Malchiah and Mulek. Yet this connection would only be apparent to someone familiar with ancient Hebrew, which Joseph Smith wasn't in 1829. One might still wonder, though, whether the Malchiah mentioned in the Bible ever really existed. Here's where an ancient artifact comes in handy. In the 1980s, a small clay stamp seal dating to the late 7th to early 6th centuries BC was discovered in Jerusalem. It bears the name Malchiyahu ben Hamelech. Malchiyahu is just a variant spelling of Malchiah, and ben Hamelech simply means son of the king. In other words, the name on the stamp seal matches up well with Malchiah, son of the king from the Book of Jeremiah, which matches up well with Mulek, son of King Zedekiah from the Book of Mormon. As one scholar concluded, it appears that the seal of Mulek has been found. While the connection can't be proven definitively, it lends ample support for the Book of Mormon's claims about Mulek, as well as Joseph Smith's prophetic calling. That's the evidence. You decide.
The next evidence is ancient names in the Book of Mormon.
The Book of Mormon says it was written in a reformed Egyptian script by ancient prophets who preserved the culture and language of their Hebrew ancestors. One of the best ways to test this claim is to look at the names in the Book of Mormon. Of its 337 proper names, 188 are unique, meaning they can't also be found in the Bible. Because most words in the Book of Mormon are English translations, there's no way to verify what ancient words stand behind them. The Book of Mormon's names, however, are transliterations, meaning they preserve the sound of the original words rather than conveying their meaning in English. This leaves the door wide open for linguistic analysis, allowing scholars to compare the Book of Mormon's unique names with known words in ancient languages. Each name in the Book of Mormon has now been looked at by scholars with linguistic training. It turns out that a good number of them have plausible links with words or names in ancient Near Eastern languages, especially with Hebrew and Egyptian. So, as a collective set, they're entirely believable. It should be understood, though, that vowels in most ancient Near Eastern languages were spoken, but not written. This means that connecting Book of Mormon names with known ancient words is mostly a matter of matching up consonants. For this reason, there will always be some uncertainty when trying to figure out what ancient word might best match the sound and spelling of a name in the Book of Mormon. Fortunately, several categories of evidence provide additional confirmation that its names are authentic. For example, some of its names seem so obviously modern that a competent forger in 1829 probably wouldn't have used them. Early critics mocked the names Sam and Josh because they sounded too American. Likewise, the name Alma has been criticized because although it was commonly seen as a Latin-based female's name in Joseph Smith's day, it's used as a male's name in the Book of Mormon. Subsequent discoveries, however, have upended these criticisms. Sam and Josh happen to be Semitic names found on artifacts that date close to Lehi's day. They are short names for Samuel and Joshua. Likewise, Alma is attested as a Semitic male's name from both before and after Lehi left Jerusalem. The fact that some people have thought these names were obviously fake makes their authenticity all the more significant. Another line of evidence comes from the names that are accompanied in the text by a brief definition called a gloss. This definition helps narrow down the ancient words that could possibly be a match, because any proposal would have to agree in both sound and meaning with a gloss name in the Book of Mormon. One example is the name Iriantum, which Nephi said means many waters. Scholars have proposed two linguistic possibilities, one Semitic and the other Egyptian, that nicely match Iriantum in its supplied definition. Other names, like Rabbana and Hermounts, also have proposals that meet this additional standard of proof. The many Hebrew and Egyptian wordplays proposed for the Book of Mormon names provide another category of evidence. It's been suggested, for example, that the name Nephi comes from an Egyptian word which means good or fair. While this proposal on its own is certainly possible, it becomes more compelling once readers see how often in the text Nephi's name is connected to the meaning of this Egyptian word. Nephi himself repeats forms of the word good 3 times in his opening and closing remarks. One of his descendants was specifically named after him so that he would remember Nephi's goodness. And Nephi's people, the Nephites, were often described as being fair. Dozens of similar wordplays have been proposed for names in the Book of Mormon. This high frequency nicely matches the strong tendency of the Hebrew authors of the Old Testament to use puns in their writing. Some have questioned the significance of these proposals because, as in the case of Nephi's name, we can't be certain what ancient words stand behind them. Yet a number of wordplays in the Book of Mormon actually don't face this dilemma, because they're associated with names also found in the Bible, whose meaning is well known. For instance, King Benjamin, whose name means son of the right hand in Hebrew, used a pun on his own name when prophesying that the righteous would sit on the right hand of God. Another layer of evidence comes from some of the Book of Mormon's parallel structures. A great example can be found in a lengthy chiasm from the 6th chapter of Helaman. At its center, the name Zedekiah is accompanied by the word Lord. This pairing makes excellent sense because the suffix in Zedekiah's name is actually a Hebrew word for Lord, thus completing the series of tight poetic parallels found in the rest of the chiasm. Although such an arrangement could possibly occur by chance, it seems more likely that whoever created it knew the Hebrew meaning behind Zedekiah's name. Finally, as a collective set, Book of Mormon names share several startling relationships with names in the Old Testament. For instance, neither record uses last names. Even more notable is that none of the names in either book use the letters Q, X, or W, nor do any of them begin with an F. In a day before computer search engines, this type of consistency would likely have been quite difficult for any would-be forger to recognize and implement. All in all, the names in the Book of Mormon are remarkably consistent with its own claims about its linguistic origins. There will always be some degree of uncertainty, even for the best proposed matches with ancient words. Yet, it's hard to imagine that a frontier farmer like Joseph Smith, who had no formal training in ancient languages when he translated the Book of Mormon, could have produced so many names with believable and in some cases quite compelling links to the ancient world. The multiple lines of additional evidence discussed in this video make an already believable set of names even more likely to be authentic. If Joseph Smith or one of his associates had fabricated the Book of Mormon, we would hardly expect this evidence to exist. On the other hand, these names make perfect sense if the Book of Mormon was truly written by ancient prophets who preserved the languages and cultures of their Near Eastern ancestors.
The evidence is strong for a literal equivalence translation of the Book of Mormon names, and with that we have at least 15 non-biblical Book of Mormon names which are now attested in ancient Hebrew inscriptions, 14 of which date to prior to 587 BC. None of these were known or published in Joseph Smith's day. Book of Mormon also contains 4 authentic Egyptian names. We argue that there was no naturalistic explanation can account for these correspondences.
Then what are the odds that some of these made-up names which aren't in the Book of Mormon are in fact authentic ancient Hebrew and Egyptian names? Why are we finding some ancient Egyptian or Hebrew names if Joseph Smith just made this up? Doesn't this support this being a translation of a language which the Nephi authors say being in the language of Egyptians, but also the learning of the Jews containing Hebrew also? What are the odds of the Book of Mormon saying that Mulek is the son of Zedekiah, and Mulek being a very plausible shortened Hebrew variant for the stamp seal Micaiah, who is identified as one of the sons of King Zedekiah? Is this just a coincidence? The next evidence being some of the strong convergences and correlations between Mesoamerican geography, civilizations, and Mayan culture with the text of the Book of Mormon.
So let's have a look at some of the correlations and convergences. Not long after the Nephites arrive, the people are desirous to have Nephi as a king. A possible explanation in time and place in the surrounding region in Mesoamerica sees the emergence of Maya kingship and reflects a surge in kings from small communities to cities with kings. Thus, the Nephites wanting Nephi to be their king fits with the Mesoamerican context in time and location. Mosiah fleeing the land of Nephi to Zarahemla in 200 BC. So it doesn't say why Mosiah and his people fled, but we know the Lamanites took over. It's plausible it could have been from a massive incursion into highland Guatemala, which is Nephi in John Sorensen's model. It appears that right when the Book of Mormon tells us that Mosiah I and those who would follow him left the city to Zarahemla, secular history tells us of an invasion that also resulted in the flight of those people who lived in that area. And if Sorensen is correct in associating Kamanalajukiyahu with the city of Nephi, I totally butchered how you pronounce that. That is one of the specific places mentioned from which the Exodus occurred. And also when the Nephites fled to the land of Zarahemla and met the Mulekites, when the two peoples met, Amalekite indicated that the Zarahemlite language had become corrupted, and they had brought no records with them, and they denied the being of their creator, and Mosiah or the people of Mosiah could not understand them. Mesoamerican scholars state the Olmec were a single language of 2 daughter languages, Mixay and Zoque. There is a separation of Mixay and Zoque around 500 BC. The language of the peoples living in where Sorensen places Zarahemla was Zoque. Thus the Mulekites would have lost their language. The Nephites being Cholin speaking. Thus, we have a convergence in time and place where peoples in Mesoamerica merged together, spoke different languages, and would have been mutually unintelligible. This correlation between the Zoque speaking Olmec and the Mayan speaking Cholin and their migration to that location connects in time and location with the Book of Mormon. Okay, costly apparel and having many wives and concubines in Jacob chapter 2. Mayan scholars point to, in Mayan communities, people were trading in goods and wearing their jewelry and exotic materials to display their wealth. This links to Jacob rebuking the Nephites for wearing costly apparel and being puffed up in pride. During that period, around 500-550 BC, having larger families, including wives, meant that you could produce and manufacture more goods to trade and obtain more wealth, which is something which occurred in that time and place among the Maya. Nephite wealth was built on trade with neighboring communities, where successful traders practiced polygamy. Thus, polygyny would be accepted as marriage according to the regional law, but not according to Nephite law. So placing Jacob's sermon in a Mesoamerican context during the time period in which Jacob gave this sermon supplies the reason that social inequality and polygyny should not only both appear in his sermon, but both be linked together. Thus, Jacob rebuking the Nephites for pride, wearing costly apparel, and the practice of polygamy is consistent with what was occurring in that time and place in Mesoamerica. Okay, let's talk a little about Maya warfare and how that correlates with the Book of Mormon. So the myth of the Maya was that they were a peaceful people ruled by serene priest astronomers. The Book of Mormon's chapters on warfare reflect the type of warfare the Mayas engaged in, including weapons, fortifications, armor, and the seasons of warfare. The Book of Mormon speaks of the Lamanites casting stones and throwing arrows at the Nephites. This casting of stones and slings was a common weapon of the Maya, because we would think of, a bow and arrow that you shoot an arrow, you don't throw it. But a weapon that the Maya used was I'm going to pronounce this wrong, atatl, which is a spear or arrow thrower. So thus talking about the Nephites and the Lamanites throwing arrows is something that actually occurred in Mesoamerica at that time. The sword spoken of in the Book of Mormon was likely the makwatil, constructed from a long staff or a large paddle-shaped piece of wood with sharp obsidian flakes, which were fixed into the edges of the wooden blade, giving it a deadly cutting edge. The story of Ammon's battle at the waters of Sebus demonstrates that the cutting edge of the Book of Mormon's sword was capable of severing arms. The cutting power of the obsidian edge of the makwatil was renowned at the time of the Spanish conquest. Thus, Ammon cutting off human arms would have been easily possible for a man armed with a makwatil sword. Another interesting correlation to the makwatil is when the anti-Nephi Lehis talk about staining their swords no more with the blood of their brethren. Wooden swords inset with rows of obsidian chips, as was the makwatil type, would have become stained by blood soaking into the wood. Had their swords been made of metal, the metaphor would have lost its power. Okay, let's talk about fortifications. The Book of Mormon says that around 75 BC, the Nephites in the land of Zarahemla engaged in digging up heaps of earth round about all the cities, throughout all the land which was possessed by the Nephites. Of the 375 fortified sites documented in Mesoamerica, some 200 had definite defensive features, while 100 others were listed as possibly fortified. Archaeology confirms the textual description of fortifications in the right time and place in Mesoamerica. Cortez described a Mayan fortification in 1525, the whole town being surrounded by a deep moat with wooden palisades and heavy swords and heavy boards built above the height of man, with large towers to hurl their stones on the enemy. This very closely matches the fortifications described in the Book of Mormon. The war chapters speak of the Nephites digging up ridges of earth too high for the Lamanites to cast their stones and arrows, raising up of timbers and earth to an exceeding height, up to the height of man, and towers to be erected so that the stones could not reach them, and that they could cast their stones from the top. So the description of the Nephite fortifications matches very closely with some of the fortifications which have been found among the Maya at the time of the Spanish conquest. What about armor in the Book of Mormon? There are 8 distinct terms for armor mentioned in the Book of Mormon: breastplate, shields, armor, headplates, arm shields, animal skins, thick clothing, and bucklers. So how does the system of Nephite armor compare with the armor used in pre-classic Mesoamerica? Mesoamerican scholars support that just as in the Book of Mormon, the most common material used for armor among the Maya and the Aztecs was a thick fabric or animal skins. The most basic form of armor was a thick, sleeveless shirt made of cotton or of other woven material. And this picture depicts a Maya warrior and the correspondences between the armor of the Nephites and that of the ancient Maya. But the seasons of warfare. So Nephite wars were typically carried out early in the dry season, which would have been like winter period or around like the new year, permitted by the agricultural maintenance pattern and when weather conditions were most suited for military campaigns. The Nephite seasonality pattern for warfare agrees remarkably well with what we know from Mesoamerica about seasons for fighting and for cultivation and harvest. The Book of Mormon manifests clear parallels to ancient patterns of military behavior. In none of these topics does the Book of Mormon contradict the ancient patterns of the practice of warfare. In many of these topics, the Book of Mormon uniquely reflects its heritage of Mesoamerica. Unibly is called the study of military affairs in the Book of Mormon, a rigorous test to the historical claims of the book. The Book of Mormon does indeed pass the test. Other Mesoamerican convergences include the mention of paying tribute to a king. Mayan kings would take over peoples and ask for a tribute, such as Limhi and his people who paid tribute to the Lamanite king. The Maya also had kings and smaller kings or rulers in their kingdom, and this correlates with King Lamoni's father being the king over all of the land, while other kings having smaller kingdoms under his jurisdiction. Now, this fits very well into the Mesoamerican time and context. Another convergence is when King Lamoni and Ammon go to visit another king to persuade them to let go to release Ammon's brethren. The term royal visit may be defined as the peaceful visit of one lord to the city of another. Although instances of royal visits were only sporadically recorded, they were no doubt a common occurrence among the classic Maya. All facets of the story, the formal visit to another city, and the expectation of a king's obeisance to the overking fit very comfortably into a Mesoamerican context. Okay, and what about the destruction of the Nephites? So to set the scene, we begin with Mormon's observation that the whole land had become covered with buildings. The people were as numerous almost as it were the sands of the sea. Also in a previous video, I talked about how Mormon describes the Gadiantans, that they went to a land northward of many waters, that they built buildings of cement, that there's a lot of deforestation there, and that there is a place in Mesoamerican Teotihuacan which matches in the right location and description with the Gadiantans. And Gardner argues that the civilization of Teotihuacan represent the Gadiantans in the Book of Mormon. The archaeological record for early classic Mesoamerica agrees that there were an increasing number of people in the Maya world along with an increasing number of new cities. At this point in Mesoamerican history, the ties between Teotihuacan in central Mexico and the Maya civilizations to the south of the Nephite holdings were stronger than ever before. This increased Teotihuacano presence in the Maya heartlands gave both the Maya and the Teotihuacan a strong motive to secure the trade route that ran along Nephite territory. The desire for control of the Maya markets may have finally reached the point that a war of destruction became cost-effective. Charles W. Golden suggests an all-out destruction of the enemy may be expensive in the short term, but reduce the need for warfare in the long term by eliminating threats to royal power. Teotihuacan is in the central basin of Mexico. Tikal is in the Maya lowlands, some 800 miles away along modern roads. Between those two major powers were the Nephites, by this time somewhere around the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and therefore potentially controlling trade routes between the north and the south. Perhaps that was not to be tolerated, with an increase in trade occasioned by the increased presence of central Mexican goods and ideas among the Maya. It is reasonable to assume that the traditional trade route between central Mexico and the large Maya centers, a route that necessarily passed through the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, had become even more important. At this point in time, and not earlier, there was sufficient reason to make the cost of eliminating the Nephites worth the expenditure. We have the growing civilization of Teotihuacan in the right time and location and matching the geographical description of Mormon in the Book of Mormon, and also a motive for war of all-out mass destruction of the Nephites for sole control of the Maya markets around AD 400, fitting with what Mayan scholars presume was probably the reason for Teotihuacan's control of Mesoamerica.
The final evidence being geology in the Book of Mormon and how the destruction in 3rd Nephi correlates and converges really well in both the location and also dated to the right century, a catastrophic volcanic eruption that occurred in Mesoamerica.
So let's have a look at some other evidences. So there's some really fascinating convergences and connections between the destruction in 3rd Nephi and what we know about volcanic and geological activity in Mesoamerica. The account of the Great Destruction in 3rd Nephi finds remarkable parallels with what modern seismology and volcanology show about cataclysmic geological events and with historical reports of such catastrophes. Yet Joseph Smith never saw a volcano, never experienced a significant earthquake, nor is it likely he had ever read any substantial literature on the subject. But the region of Mesoamerica, particularly southern Mexico and Guatemala, where many suggest that much of the Book of Mormon story may have happened, is a place of continuing volcanic and seismic activity. So some of the convergences between the text of the Book of Mormon and what we know about volcanic activity include thick darkness for 3 days, the difficulty of lighting fires or torches, storms, sharp lightnings, earthquakes, all of which occurring and being historically recorded during volcanic eruptions, which Joseph Smith would not have had any experience of. All of these things accompany volcanic eruptions, and the darkness likely came from the thick ash and the gases in the air preventing the lighting of fire. These descriptions correlate with the things expert geologists state would accompany a volcanic eruption. Recent work by Mexican archaeologists now points to a major volcanic disaster in central Mexico during the spring of the early 1st century AD. Patricia Plunkett and Gabriela Urinuela documented a significant eruption of the Popocatépetl volcano. During that event, the site of Tetimpa was covered under a massive layer of volcanic ash. The cataclysm created a column of tephra 20 to 30 kilometers high and is believed to have caused an ecological disaster of unprecedented proportions. So geologists have pointed that there was a major volcanic disaster in that region, dating to the correct century, but they cannot give a precise year. And all the descriptions of the destruction in 3rd Nephi matches and correlates very well with the things that follow a volcanic eruption, providing plausibility that the events that happened in 3rd Nephi prior to Jesus visiting the Nephites historically occurred. Supporting this, in 3rd Nephi, the Lord speaks of sunken cities such as Onaiha, Mokum, and Jerusalem. In the 1990s, Roberto Samayo noticed ruins on an underwater plateau while he was scuba diving in Lake Atitlan, located in the highlands of Guatemala. Anthropologist John Sorensen noted that the buildings appear to have been undamaged before their submersion, implying a sudden rise of the water. The sudden rise in water, which left the 30-acre island submerged under 12 to 30 meters of water, was likely due to local volcanic activity. Samabaj offers a perfect example of the type of destruction experienced by the cities of Onaiha, Mokum, and Jerusalem. As explained by the voice of the Lord, rather than sinking into the sea or having a flash flood come crashing down upon them from above, the Lord declared that the waters have I caused to come up in the stead thereof. This is exactly what happened at Samabaj. The water level of its surrounding lake quickly arose and submerged it. This underwater settlement, which until recent times lay undetected at the bottom of a popular resort lake, demonstrates that the type of flooding mentioned in 3rd Nephi is anything but far-fetched. And finally, the drought mentioned in Helaman. The drought recorded in Helaman 11 is probably the only dated climate-related event in the entire Book of Mormon that could have left the signature detectable over 2,000 years after it occurred. However, over the last 15 to 20 years, various researchers have turned to analyzing stalagmites collected from caves to reproduce the precipitation history of a given area. These analysis methods are now producing results approaching the 1-year resolution with a 95% confidence level on the order of a decade. A drought occurred just over 2,000 years ago in Mesoamerica. The drought happened within a few years of when the Book of Mormon account said it should have happened. They indicated drought duration somewhere between 3.2 to 11.4 years, a range that includes the 3 to 3.5 year duration described in the Book of Mormon, Helaman 11.
I would also recommend for people to check out my interview with the geologist Jerry Grover and his book, Geology and the Book of Mormon, to go more in depth on the evidence for geology supporting an earthquake and volcanic eruption in Mesoamerica, dated the 1st century AD, supporting John Sorensen's Mesoamerican geography model. Now, I know that there might be some unbelievers or critics watching this video who will not be persuaded by these 10 evidences provided. They might say, well, this doesn't prove anything. And just because you provided 10 things in favor for the Book of Mormon, you need to evaluate the strength of each one in order to determine if it's really evidence. And I would agree with that. But often I will hear critics make the same argument for things like the CS letter, that there's just so many problems going against the Book of Mormon or Joseph Smith or troubling things in church history, that there's no way it can be true. And I see that also as a fallacy argument. Rather, each critical argument should be weighed and examined to see if it really holds up, if it's as strong as the critics are arguing, and then look at it all collectively. Now, there's some of these arguments and evidence in favor I personally find compelling, and I personally do not have good debunking answers, counter arguments to these things. I'm not saying that there's no good arguments to be made against the Book of Mormon. And just as I would say that citing these evidences doesn't answer some of the arguments being made against, such as Deutero-Isaiah, Anachronisms, DNA, or King James Bible material, which I have done episodes on looking at the apologetic responses. Just pointing to other problems does not answer these 10 things in favor. If a critic looks at this and feels unpersuaded, or they feel more compelled by the naturalistic explanations or evidence going against, that's fine. I can understand that. People come to different conclusions. But often critics don't say that. Critics will often say that there's no evidence to support the Book of Mormon, that it's an obvious fraud, it's so clearly non-historical, implying that if you are a believer in the Book of Mormon, that you're really believing with all evidence going to the contrary.
You have extraordinary claims that need extraordinary evidence. Tonight, I've just looked for mundane evidence, and there's none. Zero. About 2016, and in about 72 hours, I completely deconstructed the historicity of the text. It's demonstrably non-historical.
It makes much more sense that I not give the allowances on these issues, and on every issue it's in favor of the critic.
All of this together at face value, the pieces start to fit together naturally for the puzzle, and you no longer have to, again, do what the church did, what we talked about at the beginning with those quotes, which is to say that you put the puzzle together and it has to match the picture the church shows you on the box. If you don't do that, they're going to fit together really well.
And the conclusion that requires the least amount of allowances is that it's all made up. Once you try this, and I don't mean you, obviously, for anybody who's listening who's a believer, try to take the mindset of it's just not true and see how many problems that solves. It solves all of them.
But the sum of these evidence and arguments for me as a believer enables me to have faith and trust in my spiritual experiences, that there's enough evidence in favor to trust and believe that my spiritual experiences, both with the Book of Mormon, are reliable. I would agree if all evidence went to the contrary, then one might call into question the legitimacy of their spiritual experiences. But I don't see that all evidence goes against. And if this really is a 19th century text, if Joseph Smith is a fraud who made up the Book of Mormon, why is there these evidences supporting the divine authenticity and ancient origin of the Book of Mormon? Should we really be finding any evidence in favor? Now, ultimately, I don't think these 10 things should be the foundation for your testimony, and I do not see them as this proves the Book of Mormon beyond a reasonable doubt. And some people may feel that they want 100% undeniable proof, and only then will they believe in the Book of Mormon, and that none of these 10 things prove anything. I have to say, if 100% undeniable proof was given for the Book of Mormon, then there would be absolutely no need for faith. And I don't think God would provide 100% undeniable proof for the Book of Mormon, because ultimately, I believe God wants us to have faith in the Book of Mormon, and the primary reason being our spiritual conviction and witness from Him, and that the things of God can only be known by the Spirit of God. As Paul says in the book of Corinthians, the things of God are foolishness to the natural man, for they must be spiritually discerned. That's only by diligent seeking, sincere, humble pondering and prayer, and receiving a divine spiritual manifestation from the Holy Ghost, that one can receive a witness and a testimony of these things. If I'm being honest, there are still some remaining questions when it comes to the Book of Mormon. I do not see it as case closed. There are some books on the shelf. However, if I were to side with the naturalistic explanations and theories, I have these 10 books on my shelf, plus the many spiritual experiences and answers to prayer I have had through the Book of Mormon, which I do not know how to account for or reconcile. And for a critic to say that all evidence shows that the Book of Mormon is clearly non-historical, that it was just a 19th century invention by Joseph Smith, then I expect for there to be good, compelling, debunking answers to these 10 evidences, and solid explanations to show why these things do not hold up. If one does not find it compelling, I at least think the Book of Mormon should be respected, and more understanding given to those who see some of this evidence, see some of these reasons as evidence to believe. And I think this is really important for those people who are wrestling and struggling in the middle, trying to weigh up if they believe the Book of Mormon is what it claims to be or not. And yes, if you're searching to find out, you should take into consideration all the arguments and criticisms going against the Book of Mormon. But if truth and evidence and data is important, then you need to take into account the strongest evidence in favor before you make your decision and come to a firm conclusion. And I hope that this video has shown that there are evidences to believe. It is not case closed, and not all evidence is in the critic's camp. And I believe these 10 evidences, combined with one's own spiritual experiences, provides very plausible reasons and evidence to have faith in the divine origin of the Book of Mormon. If you're not persuaded or don't believe, that's fine. At least you have listened and watched to the reasons why people do believe. And perhaps there can be more understanding and perhaps some more humility when it comes to being certain about who is right or who is wrong. But ultimately, I think the most important thing about the Book of Mormon, the things that will really convert you, the things that will really cause you to believe in the Book of Mormon, is ultimately the doctrine and the teachings found in the text. It's turning to it and feeling like you have received spiritual light, knowledge and revelation, and a connection to the divine. That is the ultimate thing that will convert you. None of these things alone would cause me to believe. However, I think these things may cause someone who has closed the door to perhaps again reconsider, go back to God, and sincerely pray and seek for a spiritual witness. So is there absolute evidence and undeniable proof for the Book of Mormon? I would say no to undeniable proof, but I think that there are solid reasons and plausible evidence in favor for the Book of Mormon. As faith is defined, the evidence of things not seen. There is certainly enough evidence for faith to flourish. None of these things, I think, should be the ultimate foundation for your testimony. And the main purpose of the book is the teachings, the doctrine, and the connection it brings you to God. But these things have certainly strengthened my testimony and caused me to take the Book of Mormon a lot more seriously, and may cause someone to inquire concerning its divine authenticity and origin, and receive a spiritual answer and connection to God and Jesus Christ. I'm going to finish this video with the final words from Elder Holland's talk. And before I do, this episode, although it hasn't taken loads of time to create, as I've really borrowed from lots of different sources, this whole series over this past year has been an immense amount of research, time, and sacrifice. I would really appreciate if you think that this video is important, if you think these evidences are important, to share this with someone, to like and comment on this video, to share it with people so that this video may reach others.
Speaking of the contribution made by C.S. Lewis specifically, and of Christian apologists generally, Farrar said, "Though argument does not create conviction, lack of argument destroys belief. What seems to be proved may not be embraced, but what no one shows the ability to defend is quickly abandoned. Rational argument does not create belief, but it maintains a climate in which belief may flourish." May we leave to Moroni appropriately the last word. Regarding our celebration of Chiasmus and gospel scholarship generally tonight. And now you know these things and cannot deny them because of the many evidences which you have received. Yea, even ye have received all things, both things in heaven and all things which are in the earth, as a witness that they are true. When such revelation comes, when that complete witness is borne to our heart and to our head, then surely we will know how Martin Harris felt when, after considerable struggle of both body and spirit, he was able to behold the angel Moroni holding the gold plates, turning their leaves one by one before his very eyes. In response to that spiritual and temporal evidence, he shouted for all of us, "'Tis enough. 'Tis enough. Mine eyes have beheld. Mine eyes have beheld." May our Father in heaven bless us, and an ever larger cadre of young scholars around the church to do more and more to discover and delineate and declare the reasons for the hope that is in us, that like those converted Lamanites, we may with bold conviction hold up to a world that desperately needs it the greatness of the evidence which we have received, especially the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, the keystone of our religion. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website, and you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Mer. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for watching.